Hello, my name is Roisin. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be predicting for you the 16 books that I think will make it onto the Women's Prize for Fiction long list this year. I started to see all of these videos pop up over Bookstagram and I didn't realise how close we were to the announcement of the Women's Prize for Fiction long list. So I may be the last person on BookTube to do this. Depending on when I get my shit together to edit this, I believe that the long list is announced tomorrow. It is the 7th of March that it is being announced. And I thought I had a bit longer than that, but here we are. Now, the Women's Prize for Fiction is a prize for any book written in English in the past year, any novel written in English in the past year. I know there is a length minimum, but it is based on words, and I don't know the word count for any of these books, but I think they are all long enough. And there is also a date minimum, and there is also a set date time period into which it has to fall in order to be eligible. I did double check all of these and they are all eligible, but I don't remember what the eligibility group is now. So we're just gonna go with it. But I have a list. But when I was making my list, I did end up putting 22 books on there instead of 16. So I have called out 6 honorary mentions that I'm going to mention to you now, and if they do count, I'm going to give myself half a point. So the honorary mentions are Vladimir by Julia May Jones, Cursed Bread by Sophie McIntosh, Big Swiss by Julia Bagan, The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty, Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer, and Brutes by Diz Tate. So if any of those make it on to the list, I'm giving myself half a point because I didn't commit to them, but I did think of them. Now, as I said before, when I've talked about this, I have read the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist twice, and I have read other books that have been shortlisted or won the Women's Prize for Fiction. I will leave link to the cards above my Women's Prize videos, but I don't know exactly what makes a Women's Prize book. I know that we are sort of on the border between what is more commercial and what is more literary. There's usually some that are a bit more experimental and a couple that are quite firmly in the contemporary, in the more commercial end of things. It's kind of middle brow, and I know that the brow thing is eugenicist, so we probably don't want to be using that anyway, but it is kind of, I read Hannah McGregor's book about a sentimental education, about sentimentality, and I think that really does sum up the Women's Prize for Fiction. It is sentimental, middle brow fiction. So I have a list of 16 books in here. Some of them I have read, some of them I haven't read but want to. They're all books that have been on my radar. Generally speaking, there are books that come up on the shortlist, on the long list, that are not on my radar at all, so I definitely won't have got them all right. But I'm hoping to do better than last year when I think I got 4. I think I got 4, so I got a quarter last year. I might have got 3, I'm not sure. I'll have to go back and check. But the first one on my list is one that I haven't seen on other people's lists, but I really, really loved it, and that is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I read this at the end of last year, and it is about a woman whose wife goes on a submarine mission and she comes back completely changed. She was supposed to be gone for a certain amount of time, but it took a lot longer for her to get back, and now she just wants to sit in the bath all day and drink salt water. And their relationship is strained. They don't have the relationship that they once had. This alternates with chapters about what happened on that submarine mission, as we see 3 people trapped in a very enclosed space where outside of the submarine is complete darkness, and obviously they are trapped inside the submarine. It is a beautifully written, very slow moving book where not a lot happens, with themes of love and loss and illness, ill health, a kind of a metaphor, whether that's physical or mental ill health, the losing of a relationship, and grief and mourning, and I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's beautiful, really wonderful imagery, so I really, really loved it. So if it is on there, I would be pleased. Next is one that I have an audiobook proof of, and it's come out now, so I clearly am not up to date, but that is Demon Copperhead. Yeah, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I read The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver and really loved it, and this is another big chunky book. I think Barbara Kingsolver mostly writes big chunky books. Following a boy's life. It's basically an adaptation of David Copperfield, which follows one boy's life as he grows up in London in poverty, and this follows Demon Copperhead, who is growing up in Appalachia, which is where Barbara Kingsolver is from, and it follows him in rural American poverty through the course of his life. And I think that Barbara Kingsolver writes beautiful, wonderful, very political books, and I think that this big chunky book could be on the Women's Prize shortlist. Next one that I saw all over Bookstagram, and I have also read, is The Book of Goose by Yiyun Li. The fact that I saw so much praise for it on Bookstagram made me think that it would be definitely on the judges' radar, and the themes of this book make me think it would be a Women's Prize book. It is about a friendship between 2 young girls in the French countryside after the Second World War, whose imaginary games lead to one of the girls girls being shipped off at first to Paris and then to a boarding school in England and the strain this puts on their relationship. It deals with some very dark themes, but they are also always at the periphery because our characters are teenage girls and it is a coming of age novel, but also an unhealthy, obsessive relationship. So those kinds of relationships and the very much focus on girlhood, I think, is very women's prize. I think there were definitely a lot of books that dealt with girlhood on the prize last year, I think, or some anyway. And whilst I didn't love this book, I thought it was pretty good, but it didn't quite land for me. I felt like it was holding back a bit. I felt like that about a lot of the women's prize shortlist last year. So another one that I have an audiobook of but haven't read yet is Maame, and I also saw this a lot on Bookstagram, which is one of the reasons that I think it could be on this list. It is a coming of age novel about a woman called Maggie who is living in London with a mother who spends most of her time in Ghana. Maddie is the primary caretaker from her father, who suffers from advanced stage Parkinson's. At work, her boss is a nightmare, and Maddie is tired of being the only black person in every meeting. When her mum returns from her latest trip to Ghana, Maddie gets a chance to get out of the family home and finally start living. So it is a coming-of-age novel, a novel about immigration, being the daughter of immigrants, and family obligations and different cultural expectations and career changes, and very much focused on this one woman. And I think that that, again, is kind of a woman's prize style book. Next, I have A Spell of Good Things by Ayobame Adebayo, and Stay With Me by Ayobame Adebayo, her debut novel, was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and it was one that a lot of people on BookTube wanted to win that year. I don't remember what did win, but she is a formerly shortlisted author, so her being on the long list would not be that unexpected, because I think if you've already been longlisted or shortlisted, you get more, your publisher can put more books on, I think. That might be the booker. I'm not 100% on. This is another story set in modern Nigeria about two families caught in the riptides of wealth, power, romantic obsession and political corruption. Eniola is tall for his age, a boy who looks like a man. His father has lost his job, so Eniola spends his days running errands for the local tailor, collecting newspapers and begging, dreaming of a future. Waraola is a golden girl, the perfect child of a wealthy family, now an exhausted young doctor in her first year of practice. She is beloved by Kunle, a volatile son of family friends. And I think that kind of the personal take on the political, again, is something that I notice a lot in women's prize novels. They have that focus on the individual and very character focused, but often with political or bigger, wider things that are being talked about just from that personal perspective. Horse by Geraldine Brooks is another one by a big hitter. Geraldine Brooks is a very well-known, well-respected author, and always, again, there are a mix of debuts and newer stuff and also big hitters on the long list. As far as I'm aware, like last year, Louise Erdrich was on the shortlist and Elif Shafak was on the shortlist, but there were also some debuts on there as well. In Kentucky in 1850, an enslaved groom named Jarrett and a bay foal forge a bond of understanding that will carry the horse to record-setting victories across the South. When the nation erupts in civil wars, an itinerant young artist who has made his name on paintings of the racehorse takes up arms for the Union. On a perilous night, he reunites with the stallion and his groom, very far from the glamour of any racetrack. In New York City in 1954, Martha Jackson, a gallery owner celebrated for taking risks on edgy contemporary painters, becomes obsessed with a 19th century equestrian oil painting of mysterious prominence. Washington DC 2019, Jess, a Smithsonian scientist from Australia, and Theo, a Nigerian-American art historian, find themselves unexpectedly connected through their shared interest in the horse, one studying the stallion's bones for clues to his power and endurance, and the other uncovering the lost history and of the unsung black horsemen who were critical to his racing success. So there we have multiple timelines in a historical fiction, and I find that that is super common in prize books, and I think the reason I notice it so much is because I'm not a big fan of it, generally speaking. But it can be interesting, it can be done well. Another one by a former prize winner, although this is by a Booker Prize winner rather than a Women's Prize winner, is Birnam Wood by Eleanor Catton. Eleanor Catton wrote The Luminaries, which won the Booker and is a 900-page chunky book based around astrology set during the New Zealand gold rush in the 19th century, and I absolutely love it. And Eleanor Catton has come out this year with Birnam Wood, which I am just about to find out what it's about, but I have seen the cover around in other places, and I was intrigued instantly because I like Eleanor Catton, and Birnam Wood is obviously Macbeth, until Birnam Wood marches on High Dunsinane, I think is the quote from that. Birnam Wood is on the move. 5 years ago, Mira Bunting founded a guerrilla gardening group, Birnam Wood, an undeclared, unregulated, sometimes criminal, sometimes philanthropic gathering of friends. This activist collective plants crops where no one will notice. Mira stumbles on an answer. A landslide has closed the Korowai Paras, cutting her off from the town of Thorndyke. Natural disaster has created an opportunity, a sizable farm seemingly abandoned, but Mira is not the only one interested in Thorndyke. The enigmatic American billionaire has snatched it up to build his end times bunker. So this is set in New Zealand. I think, what's his name? Peter Thiel has his end time bunker in in New Zealand. Has his end time bunker in New Zealand, and I think that this is going to be kind of a rip off that. It's another political book with a focus on the environment, climate change, and it's a psychological thriller apparently, which does obviously have more of a wide readership than something like The Luminaries. One that I have I know nothing about. What caught my eye for this one is the gorgeous cover. I absolutely love this cover. And this is Dazzling by Chikodili Emalumadu, and I actually think I did read this synopsis before because I think it was on my anticipated releases, but I've forgotten it because my brain is not working this year. But anyway, this is about Treasure and her mother who lost everything when Treasure's daddy died. Haggling for scraps in the market, Treasure meets a spirit who promises to bring her father back, but she has to do something for him first. Ozoimena has an itch in the middle of her back that can't be scratched, an itch that speaks to her patrilineal destiny to defend her people by becoming a leopard. Her father impressed upon her what an honour this was before he vanished, but it's one thing she couldn't want less. Yeah, that does sound really interesting. You know, I love a ghost story, absolutely, and I love books that weave in folklore, and I think the Women's Prize quite enjoy a folklore book too, as far as I'm aware. So yeah, I think that sounds, again, two girls coming of age, that kind of thing. I think it has Women's Prize potential. One that I haven't read, and I didn't want to read, but I think might be shortlisted or longlisted, is Lapvona by Otessa Moshfeg. I don't know if Otessa Moshfeg has been longlisted before. Like I said, I'm not an expert on any of these book prizes, but Lapvona, I think, was the Moshfeg that came out with the most fanfare, and the most people were excited about it. And I think that Matrix by Lauren Groff was longlisted. Possibly, and I feel like these two books are in a similar vein. I have only read My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Moshfeg, and I didn't like it at all. There is a good chance that that's why I didn't pick this up, because I didn't like My Year of Rest and Relaxation, and I didn't like Matrix, so I didn't think that this book was going to be for me. It is Moshfeg's attempt at historical fiction. In a medieval fiefdom buffeted by natural disasters, a motherless shepherd boy finds himself in the unlikely pivot of a power struggle that puts all manner of faith to savage tests. Little Marek, the abused and delusional son of the village shepherd, never knew his mother. One of life's few consolations for Marek is his enduring bond with the blind village midwife who suckled him when he was a baby. Ina's gift extends beyond childcare. She possesses a unique ability to connect with the natural world. Her gift often brings her transmissions of sacred knowledge levels far beyond those anything of the other villagers, however religious they might be. So we've got kind of witch hunt vibes and magic, which, you know, if it wasn't written by Otessa Moshfeg, historical fiction with witch hunts and kind of dark, creepy, gross body stuff, it's all my vibe. I don't know, because I've only read My Year of Rest and Relaxation, but it wasn't on my list, but it might be on theirs. One thing that I do think is cheating a bit, and I'm not ashamed to say I'm about to do it, is stealing books off of other long lists. Not cheating on the point of the prize, I just mean for me making this list, I'm like, well, it was on a different long list, so there is a chance it will be on this long list as well. And so Nightcrawling by Leila Motley was on the Booker Prize long list. It didn't make the shortlist, but it was one that was very popular with a lot of people. Now, Leila Motley she might be 20 now. I think she was 19 when the Booker Prize longlist was announced. She was 17 when she was writing this book. She is a wee child, writing phenomenal fiction by all accounts. And again, this has aspects that I think make it very Women's Prize fodder, particularly it's a central character as a woman. It is focused on women and coming of age. Kiara Johnson does not know what it is to live as a normal 17-year-old. With her mother in a rehab facility and an older brother who devotes his time and money to a recording studio, she fends for herself. Kiara finds herself walking the streets after night, determined to survive in a world that refuses to protect her. Then one night she's picked up by officers 601 and 190, and the gruesome deal she is offered in exchange for her freedom lands her at the centre of a media storm. If she agrees to testify in a grand jury trial, she could help expose the sickening corruption of a police department, but honesty comes at a price, one that could leave her family vulnerable to the retaliation and endanger everyone she loves. So this is one, again, that was highly praised last year, and lots of people who read the Booker Prize Longlist really loved this one. So I think that it could be on this long list as well. The one that I am currently reading is The Furrows by Namwali Serpell, and I think that this might make it onto the shortlist. I'm enjoying it so far. This is about a girl called Cassandra whose brother Wayne dies when she is 12 and he is 7 years old. Are told the story of how he dies, and then we are told the story of how he dies, and she also, when she is older, later on, she keeps meeting him, she keeps seeing him again, either in a dream or in real life. She's a bit confused and she keeps seeing him. And I read The Old Drift by Namwali Serpell, and I absolutely loved it. My favourite book that I read that year, and I am enjoying reading The Furrows as well. I know that something is going to happen halfway through that changes things, because every review that I have read has said that something happens partway through and the second half of the book is very, very different, and it changes your view on the first half of the book. So whilst I don't think the book is anything like this, that review is reminding me of No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, which is another book of two halves that people said when you read the second half it completely changes the book, it changes the way that you see things. And so I think that that one was shortlisted, I think, for the Women's Prize, and so obviously that kind of conceit of reading a book and thinking it's one thing and then it's something else happening does work for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and the writing of this is just stunning. I absolutely love Namwali Serpell's writing. A former Booker Prize winner that I think might get a nod this year is Maggie O'Farrell with her book The Marriage Portrait. Hamnet won this back in 2020, and this is another historical fiction about a real life person. This is set in Florence in the 1560s. Lucretia, the third daughter of Cosimo de' Medici, is comfortable with her obscure place in the palazzo. But when her older sister dies on the eve of her marriage to Alfonso de Stete, the ruler of Ferrara, Modena and Reggio, Lucretia is thrust unwittingly into the limelight. The Duke is quick to request her hand in marriage and her father to accept on her behalf. Lucretia must now make her way to a trouble court whose customs are opaque, where her arrival is not universally welcomed. Perhaps most mystifying of all is her husband himself. As Lucretia sits in uncomfortable finery for the painting which is to preserve her image for centuries to come, one thing becomes worryingly clear. In the court's eyes she has one duty: to provide the heir who will shore up the future of the Ferrarese dynasty. Until then, for all her rank and nobility, the new Duchess's future hangs in the balance. So again, we have historical fiction focused on a woman who is out of her depth, who is coming of age. She's described as being barely out of childhood, so it is similarly that. So I think, again, it's a Women's Prize style book. Not all of the books last year were based on women coming of age, but it does seem to be a fairly common thing. Women in a changing period of time, period of their life, and very character focused books, I think, are often Women's Prize books are often very character focused, as this one sounds like it will be. So I mentioned some more commercial books are often on the list, and this one is a genre book, and I think that celebrating more genre fiction in prizes is really good and should be done. And whilst I'm not a huge genre reader myself, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin was so popular that last year, end of last year I think, and it is a science fiction book with elements of romance, but I think the fact that it was so popular, so broadly loved by people who don't always read science fiction as well as people who do, I think that could make it very much of this for this prize. And also it is about women in STEM. I think that a woman designs a game. Two kids meet in a hospital gaming room in 1987. One is visiting her sister and the other recovering from a car crash. The days and months are long. Their love of video games becomes a shared world of joy, escape and fierce competition. But also too soon that time is over. When the pair spot each other 8 years later in a crowded train station, they are catapulted back to that moment. The spark is immediate, and together they get to work on what they love, making games to delight, challenge and immerse players. Their collaborations make them superstars. This is the story of the perfect world Sadie and Sam built, the imperfect world they live in, and everything that comes after success. Money, fame, duplicity and tragedy. So I think it is slightly out of the comfort zone of a very middle of the road women's fiction book, but I think that introducing more genre fiction is that something that they might be leaning towards possibly. So I think that that could happen. Another one that I've been meaning to read by an author that I've read from and enjoyed before is Ghost Music by Anne Yu. This is a novel set in Beijing. For 3 years, Song Yan has filled the emptiness of her Beijing apartment with the tentative notes of her young piano students. With her marriage, she gave up on her own career as a concert pianist, but her husband Bowen has long rebuffed her desire to have a child. Instead, she must accommodate her mother-in-law, newly arrived from the province of Yunnan and bringing with her long-buried family secrets. Soon, strange parcels start to show up on the doorstep, and Song Yan's dreams become troubling and claustrophobic. Striking out alone through the winter city, she finds herself pulled into the ancient hutongs to confront the source of her unease. There are elements of strangeness in Anne Yu's first novel, elements of kind of magic almost, or magical realism, and I think that that sounds like it could be true of this. There is a mystery, there is something strange going on that isn't quite upfront. It is another book that I have an audiobook of, so I need to listen to that. But I really, it's one that I'm really looking forward to, and I hope that more people get to read. So, not that I've read it, but I hope that it gets a wide readership, and so I think that if it was on the prize long list, that would happen. Another one that I think is a little more commercial, but as I said, those are on the list often, and is one that I've been seeing on Bookstagram because I really recognise the cover, is Really Good Actually by Monica Heisey. And this was a bestseller, and the quotes on the front are from Marion Keyes and Dolly Alderton. And Marion Keyes has definitely been longlisted before. I don't know about Dolly Alderton, but those are very popular women's writers, and this is written by a screenwriter from Schitt's Creek, which is again super popular, and having something a bit more light and humorous on the list I think is also quite common. I feel like when you get a divorce, everyone's wondering how you ruined it all, what made you so unbearable to be with. Maggie's marriage has ended just 608 days after it started, but she's fine. She's doing really good actually. Sure, she's alone for the first time in her life, can't afford anywhere to rent, and her obscure PhD is going nowhere, but at the age of 29, Maggie is about to embrace her new status as surprisingly young divorcee. Soon she's taking up sadness hobbies and getting back out there sex-wise, oversharing in the group chat and drinking with her high-intensity new divorce friend Amy. As Maggie throws herself headlong into the chaos of her first year of divorce, she finds herself questioning everything. So again, it is a woman in a changing period of her life. So I think that that could be, ties in with a lot of the other books. But like I said, it is a little more commercial, and I think therefore could be on here because a lot of these other books are a little less commercial. Then the final one is one that I've only heard of because it was on the Goodreads Choice Awards for Historical Fiction last year, and I was considering doing that before I gave it up for being too much work. But I think it won, and it certainly had the most reviews of anything, and I was surprised I hadn't heard of it until then. It is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus, and this is, again, obviously historical fiction in the 20th century. Chemist Elizabeth Zott is not your average woman. In fact, Elizabeth Zott would be the first to point out that there is no such thing. But it's the early 1960s, and her all-male team at Hastings Research Institute takes a very unscientific view of equality. Except for one, Calvin Evans, the lonely, brilliant, Nobel Prize-nominated grudge holder who falls in love with, of all things, her mind. But like science, life is unpredictable, which is why a few years later, Elizabeth Zott finds herself not only a single mother, but the reluctant star of America's most beloved cooking show, Supper at Six. Elizabeth's unusual approach to cooking proves revolutionary. But as her following grows, not everyone is happy, because as it turns out, Elizabeth Zott isn't teaching women to cook, she's daring them to challenge the status quo. So there you go, that's a very, very much a women's fiction, women's prize, kind of where they would meet, is in that kind of story, I think. And so I think possibly that one might end up on there too. Not one I'm actually particularly interested in reading though. So there you have it. Those are the 16 books that I think might be longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, plus 6 books that almost made it onto my long list. But I've read one of them out of all of those books, I think, so I'm not speaking from experience or knowledge, and like I said, I'm not particularly knowledgeable about the Women's Prize either, so I'm just guessing at this point. But fingers crossed, hopefully some of them will be on there, and we'll see how well I do tomorrow, or you will already know if you're watching this a bit later than that. So thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments down below any of your predictions, anything that I left out that you think is a glaring omission, any that I left on that you think is a really stupid thing to add. I would love to hear from you in the comments, like I said. And thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe. I put out new videos twice a week, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.